America's best days can still be ahead, and I want to lead us forward. Join me now in the Reid Revolution.
Happy Friday. You made it to the end of the week, at least the start of the last of the week. I'm John Reid, and this is the Reid Revolution on this Ronald Reagan Day, the 6th day of February, 2026. So Ronald Reagan would have been, doing the math, 115 years old today. And it's so strange to be one of the last people who worked for him, saw him every day towards the end of his life. It was 1993 when I moved out to Los Angeles to take an internship. Right after I moved up my graduation from Baylor University, I had a degree in political science. And it was part of me, like everybody said, "Oh, yeah, don't move up your graduation. You're gonna regret losing that last semester on campus." And I was like, I'm getting the heck out of here. And to go work for Ronald Reagan, who was, my political hero, who I think I've got to believe anyone who's objective looks at what Reagan accomplished in his 8 years in office and his tenure in public life as governor of California, as an advocate for conservative principles. Surely, this poll that they do of who the greatest president is, it's always going to be George Washington, right? But of the modern era, I think it's got to be Reagan. Trump's doing a lot of stuff. So happy Ronald Reagan Day, 2026. We hope that in the end, Trump will have accomplished some of the amazing things in this decade that Reagan was able to accomplish, bankrupting the Soviet Union, essentially. SDI was one of the ways of doing that. The Star Wars effort, the the Iron Dome you see over Israel is in large part because Ronald Reagan pushed and pushed and pushed to come up with a defense mechanism. And it's different in Israel than what he initially envisioned with the satellites in space. But that's where we're headed. And I think you've got to have leaders who are willing to take that type of risk and have that type of vision about, how you position the country economically and how you protect the country. Do you think most people are doing that these days, today? I don't. I think we're so mired in, arguments like, are we going to get rid of people who don't have a right to be here, that we're missing some of the larger plans that need to be put in place to position us for success going forward. Trump's not stupid. Trump sees Greenland and says, in the next 20, 25, 30 years, 50 years, this is going to be a key territory for the survival of the United States. And we better get this under control and have no illusions about who controls the shipping routes, who controls the ground game there. Everybody's freaked out about, like, oh, why are we worried about Greenland? Because someone's actually thinking about the next war. God forbid, we don't want it, but and no one wants to talk about it. And if you bring up something like this, you wind up being called a warmonger. But sometimes the people who are thinking about the war that could happen are the ones who wind up preventing it from occurring. And I give Reagan credit for that. We very easily, after decades of détente, of kind of staring at each other and getting ready to kill each other, we very easily could have had a hot war with the Soviet Union. That could have happened. But Reagan stood his ground. Reagan spent the money, and it was deficit spending at the time. He spent the money to make sure that we were an intimidating military force that kept the Soviets at bay and kept them worried. And their economy was nothing compared to our economy. So they couldn't keep up economically. They spent that money. They couldn't keep up economically. And then culturally, and this is something that President Trump needs to be thinking about. And who am I to give thoughts or lessons to President Trump? Reagan was very disciplined, and I can tell you that personally. I started out as the guy who was pouring the coffee and doing the morning clips. I mean, literally the clips. The Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and the New York Times would come into the office, and I would sit there with the scissors and cut out all the news stories that referenced President Reagan or Mrs. Reagan, and then I'd tape them to a piece of paper, and then I'd go to the Xerox machine, the Xerox machine, and I would make these copies, and then I would take one to the president, I'd take one to the chief of staff, and sometimes I'd drive out to the house and give one to Mrs. Reagan. I mean, in 1993, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have electronic ways to send stories, so that, I started at the bottom in that office, and then over the course of the year started being called upon to write the first draft of a lot of speeches for the president. And I would often find myself sitting in the house with him, his home, and he would be going through the draft that I had written that the chief of staff had approved. It wasn't like I was directly walking in and handing him what I had thought of. The chief of staff had made edits. And then he would make edits. I like this. I don't like this. Let's use this word. Let's use this line. It was interesting to me. I was 82 years old, and he was still pretty actively engaged mentally. He was in decline. I'm not going to lie about it. You could tell he was in decline, but he was actively engaged in certainly everything that was attributed to him, his speeches, his op-eds, even the important letters. He edited them right there with me. I can tell you that personally. But once the decision was made, and that this was the message, and this was the way he was going to convey the message, and it correctly sounded like him and reflected his beliefs, he stuck to the script. They were so critical of President Reagan as an actor. Oh, he just reads the script that he's given. And a lot of politicians do that. I mean, I ran into that during my campaign. It's like, thank you very much. I mean, and I had some smart people working for me, but I'm going to rework this so that it reflects what I want to say in the way I want to say it. But I do think there's something about once you've made those changes and it does reflect what you believe and how you want to say it, you stick with it. And you don't take the bait in your own head or in the audience and wind up distracted and say some things that then change the headline of what you wanted. Like, what do you want the heading? You're about to give a speech. What do you want the audience to walk away thinking? What's the message that you want them to walk away thinking? What should the headline of the newspaper be? That's one of the things I learned working in the Reagan office. I mean, we're doing this event. What do we want this audience to think? And if there's any press there, what is our message? And how do we make sure that the press doesn't determine the message and the headline, that we control it? We only talk about what we want to talk about at this moment and don't get distracted. And, it's worse today than it was in Reagan's time. I mean, at least then, you had Sam Donaldson, who was obnoxious, but and the press wasn't on Reagan's side. But I mean, my God, they seemed like little puppy dogs compared to the vicious, rabid, anti-Republican, anti-conservative, anti-American journalists or pseudo-journalists, the activist journalists that are out there today. And I think President Trump, it's so weird. I don't want to get distracted here, but it's so weird. When we started yesterday morning, remember I said that President Trump was at the National Prayer Breakfast. I mentioned Congressman Ben Cline from Virginia, who I later found out was the co-chair of the breakfast yesterday. That's great. Good for Virginia that Congressman Ben Cline was there and was leading that. And I said, I think Trump is being very disciplined, but I was wrong. It wasn't bad. But, one of the things, there were several things where he went off script and he just kind of ad-libbed, which shows that he's not in mental decline. Certainly not like Joe Biden, who didn't know where the podium was and where the exit was and was falling all over himself and couldn't articulate a thought without prompting. Poor old man. I mean, I didn't like him, but you had to look at that and go, wow, that was awful. Trump gets up yesterday. And the thing, I think I shared this with producer Dan last night. that I said, "Oh, he's being very disciplined." Then I listened to the speech, and he said, "Religion is back in America. Oh, it's bigger than ever because of what I've done." I thought, "Oh God, religion is back in America, and it's bigger than ever because of what I've done." I mean, that's the kind of thing that if I hated Trump, and I don't, but if I was hostile to Trump, that's the kind of thing that I would jump all over and beat the heck out of him, and it would make me mad personally. And yeah, Trump's going to be Trump, but I do think he should look at those first couple of months of his administration. He was kind of modeling Reagan. Things were very moderate in the way he was presenting himself publicly. The tweets were relatively moderate. I think that was starting off as well received. I mean, clearly, the real Donald Trump is much more punch you in the face and bombastic than what we saw the first couple of months. But Reagan was very disciplined. Changed the speech. He got what he wanted. I mean, there was no question. I mean, I remember one time I made him mad. I didn't mean to, but I made him mad. Yeah, there we are. That was, oh boy, I looked different then. That was the Los Angeles office of President Reagan after he left the White House. Might have been my last day at the office. I don't know, but I made him mad because he was meeting with some people, and the lady who was his secretary kept sending me in to go interrupt the meeting to end the meeting. And he said, "Yes, John, but I'll be done. I'll let you know when I'm done." And I didn't take the hint. And maybe 10 minutes later, I walked back in, and I could see, whoo, that was not the right thing to do. And the Secret Service agent told me, he made a gesture like, "Don't get out of here. Don't, you're making him mad." So later that afternoon in the elevator, he was getting ready to go home, and I usually went in the elevator and down the steps with him to his town car. I said, I think I overstepped today, and I apologize. I was watching your face. Please excuse me if I was a little too aggressive." And he turned and he said, "It's fine, John. Just remember who the general is here." And that was, I mean, I thought that was a very polite way of course correcting a young intern staffer without screaming and cussing or being passive aggressive. I thought that was pretty important. that I mean, it was kind of insight into how he managed people as a leader. You don't have to freak out all the time. I mean, if I had done it again, he might have freaked out, but he was very very measured. But he was going to get what he wanted to get. He was going to say what he wanted to say. But once that was decided, like an actor, he was going to stick to the script because everybody was, I mean, I guess occasionally he'd call an audible and move things, but he was going to stick with the script. And I think maybe that kind of message discipline, if I might be so bold as to say, that might be helpful with the Trump team going forward, because they're getting rolled right now with the national press. And I mean, it's impossible to maintain control of the narrative. It's just impossible with the internet and the haters that are out there who are aggressively trying to cause harm to him, but should think about that. And I was so glad to see uh, the president yesterday, and I do think it was important that people hear him. For all the people who've been talking about his decline, up there, not just reading a script. And there's some Virginia people. I mentioned I ran into Abigail Spanberger yesterday. I didn't get to stay at the Omni in downtown Richmond. The new governor, Abigail Spanberger, for those of you who are watching who are not here in Virginia. And I keep being told I mean, is it discipline that she's just reading her script? Or is that revealing that maybe she's not as comfortable with the material in front of her and she's not comfortable riffing and ad-libbing? You kind of expect a Virginia governor to be able to think on their feet. The pressure's a little less and there's not as much press scrutiny, so you can get away with more of that. Hey, last year, producer Dan, we did Reagan Day. And it was the start of my campaign for lieutenant governor. We were at the Park Lane Tavern, which sadly, gosh, I hate that they're gone. Do you have that image of us?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reagan Day
Let's see.
last year at the Park Lane Tavern. I mean, we had, 200 people who came through for that?
Yeah.
And we pulled it together at the last end. But producer Dan was by my side at that, too. He's still working at the radio station, but there's the Reagan cutout, and there's the presidential seal at the time. And I would love to get to a place where we could do the Ronald Reagan Day event again. But you can bet I'm not going to let it slide on February 6th. In my household, it will. I mean, I already told Alonzo this morning. It's like, Happy Ronald Reagan Day, and he rolled his eyes. But and I'm calling my mother later and say, Happy Ronald Reagan Day. My sister.
Speaking of Alonzo, I feel as though I am inadvertently doing my absolute best Alonzo impression in that photo. I feel like that's how Alonzo looks in all the photos of you two guys.
Well, when you wind up, when you have to look up at the camera, I'm a little taller than most of you guys, so that's what that does. Yeah. But anyway, happy Ronald Reagan Day on this February 6th. Eventually, I hope we'll get to a place where it's officially Ronald Reagan Day. And, I don't know what he would say. I don't want to say it should be a national holiday because I think Reagan would probably say, no, everybody should keep doing what they're doing. Make some money. Advance yourself. Maybe it should be Ronald Reagan Day national holiday where you take the day and you work on something outside of your official work that will advance you and the country going forward. Not necessarily like volunteer for a charity, not necessarily, you could do that. But how many times do you say on Sunday night, you say, all right, this is the week that I'm going to write the first chapter of my book, or this is the week that I'm going to, do something for my kids, or I'm going to start, something basic, like I'm going to go back to the gym and get myself physically under control. And then you look up and Friday morning at 10 in the morning, you go, oh my God, the whole week has gone by. I haven't done that. Maybe that would be the theme of a Ronald Reagan Day is do something to advance yourself, your community, and your nation. Don't booze it up by the pool or, blow the day, waste the day, be sedentary, but do something great for yourself and for your community. I mean, that's a different mindset than most of these holidays that we have. And I think that's what Reagan did. I mean, that guy and even Mrs. Reagan, they worked. I was shocked. I mean, they were out of the White House after all these years in public life, and I would go by their house at 6, 7 p.m. on the West Coast, excuse me, and they'd still be signing books and writing letters to people. I mean, Mrs. Reagan had her old little, like my grandmother did, her little handwritten directory. And sometimes I would say, now, Mrs. Reagan, do you have the telephone number for so-and-so? And she would go through and write on a little card after looking it up in her little book, here's the person that I need you to call or that I was looking for. I'll tell you this story real quick, and then we got to go. And there is some serious news to talk about, but people seem to like the Reagan stories. When I was working for him, there was no money involved. And, as I have mentioned, my family's not rich. I am not rich. So this was a pretty, I'm very thankful to my parents, my mother and father, who made sure that I could do this internship. And I think they were excited about it. So they floated me the money, as they have on a number of occasions, like, this is valuable and we're going to find some way to make this happen. So I'm very appreciative of that. But I couldn't afford a rent in Los Angeles. Oh my gosh, even in 1993, it was crazy. And I didn't want to live with wackos in LA because I looked on, in those newspapers, like looking for a roommate. And then I realized that's not going to, my mindset as a conservative from Baylor University and from Richmond, Virginia, I probably wasn't going to mesh real well with a lot of the really left-leaning people in California. And as soon as they heard out that I was working for Ronald Reagan, that was a non-starter. The presidency did not impress them. So the way I made this work was I got a job as the resident advisor for my fraternity, which was Delta Tau Delta at UCLA. And boy, is a big difference between Baylor University, the largest Baptist school in the world, and Woo, University of California at Los Angeles. My God, I mean, night and day difference in the attitudes of the students and the faculty and the people. So anyway, I'm at the dorm room in the fraternity house at UCLA, and we didn't have pagers, or at least I didn't. We didn't. There was no internet at the time. I had a phone in my room with an answering machine on it, like the old-fashioned answering machine, 1993, and it was a Saturday evening, and I was in the room, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was Mrs. Reagan calling me. My name was in her little book, and she said, "John, no one is here." I mean, the Secret Service agents were there, but they were outside of the house, and the help, the very nice lady who was the maid, or who cooked food and kind of took care of things at the house. I guess she had the weekend off, and all the lights had burned out in their bedroom, and the sun was getting ready to go down. So I got in my car. Mrs. Reagan said, "Could you come over and help us?" So I got in my car, threw on some decent clothes, got in my car, went over to the Reagan house in Bel Air, rang the little doorbell at the gate. The Secret Service let me in. I ring the door. She answers the phone. She's in her bathrobe. The president's in his bathrobe, and the lights have burned out in the bedroom. So, and I'm 6'3", so they took a towel and put it down on their bed, and I took my shoes off and stood on their bed and changed all the light bulbs, which for some reason had burned out at the same time, in the bedroom, so that they would have lights in their bed. And I just think that's a crazy story. And it was one of those things, when it was over with, it was like, how many people have any story like this? This is weird. I called my parents afterwards. It was late at night, East Coast time, and I said, this is bizarre, but I've got to tell somebody. I was just standing on Ronald and Nancy Reagan's bed, changing all the light bulbs, standing on a towel, talking to them, and they were super nice about it. It's like, you call your grandkid over, I guess, to take care of something. Anyway, we could do 2 or 3 hours, and I could tell you those stories all day and all night. Some of them really tiny but interesting, and some a little more heavy, but we'll save that for another time. Let's take a quick break, and we will come back. I've got Jenny Beth Martin, who was one of the founders of the Tea Party movement. Let's get Jenny Beth's thoughts on what's happening nationally and in Virginia with this gerrymandering and the attempt to save democracy. The Democrats are saying they're going to save democracy by making sure that 45% of the people have no representation in Congress. Does that sound like it makes sense? We're going to save democracy by making sure that all the Republicans don't have representatives in Congress. Oh, I see how it is. Yeah, don't try that with me. We'll talk to Jenny Beth in just a moment when we return on this edition of the Reid Revolution.
Talking about the continuing recession tonight, you have blamed mistakes of the past, and you have blamed the Congress. Does any of the blame belong to you?
Yes, because for many years I was a Democrat.
Love it. Love it. See, that's the kind of humor. That's not really nice to say, but it's humorous. It's kind of funny. Who can really be mad? Even if you're a Democrat, you got to admit that's kind of a zinger. It's not crude. It's not crash. You're not calling them a name or anything. I mean, that if you're in public life, you probably want to try to emulate that attitude. It still says what you need to say, but not in a way that is crude, right? Not nasty. So we'll play a couple more clips. Thank you for that, producer Dan. We welcome you back to the Reid Revolution on this Friday morning. And Jenny Beth Martin is with us, who is a guest frequently on the radio program in years gone by, one of the founders of the Tea Party movement, and I really appreciate you've seen a lot of this stuff. And I don't know, do you live in Virginia, Jenny Beth?
No, I don't live in Virginia. And I'm from Georgia originally. I moved to Florida a few years ago, but our
might have been
office is still
smart.
in Georgia.
Okay. Well, tell me what you're tracking, because Abigail Spanberger and the Democrats ran on a platform of moderation. I kept telling everybody on the campaign trail, they are not moderate. And all you got to do is look at her voting record in the Congress. This is not a moderate lady. And boy, 3 weeks into this administration, the proposals are just out of control. Tax increases and gun restrictions that go beyond anything we've seen before. What's your take? What are you tracking?
Well, I think that Abigail Spanberger ran with a costume of moderation. And as soon
Yeah.
as the votes were counted, the mask came off, and we see she's a radical leftist. And you're right. If you'd watched the way she voted in Congress, it shouldn't be a surprise. But people in the campaign trail were hearing promises of working across the political aisle, pragmatism over partisanship, promises of being bipartisan. So she presented herself on the campaign trail as a moderate, and most people, John, are not as involved as you and I are, so they're not going to be going and looking at all of the way that a person voted previously, and they believe what she said. Well, now we're just a few weeks into her governorship, and we see she's not moderate at all. She's a radical leftist. The proposals that are coming out of the state legislature, there's no indication from Spanberger that she's going to veto these. She's going to pass them, and they're extremely radical. The tax increases, changes to the election system, the gerrymandering for making it more democratic somehow. I mean, at least be honest about what you're doing. We're redistricting and we're gerrymandering to give ourselves an advantage. Don't sit there and lie to people and tell people that you're doing this to somehow be more democratic. And she's going to approve all of these things. Virginia is going to make a hard left turn. And I hope that voters across the rest of the country are paying attention to this and don't believe the lies the Democrats will tell on the campaign trail this year.
Well, you've watched a lot of election cycles and have been involved in kind of recalibrating where the party is on some of these key issues. But gosh, are you looking at these special elections and the big swing and, Republican candidates losing, and not just losing by a little bit, losing big? What's your assessment of that, and how do we fix it, if it's possible, by November when the midterms happen?
Yeah, I think it is possible to fix it. I think that part of the problem, from what I can see, and I haven't been on the ground where every single one of these special elections has happened, but part of the problem that I can see is that the Republican Party has not been as active and as organized in these elections to try to hold the seat. And I think that that's worked against them. In Georgia, there were 2 public service commissioner seats that went from Republican to Democrat, and those were statewide elections. Yet when I talked to people from Georgia, everyday Georgians, they didn't even realize the election was happening. And there was not a lot of communication about it, and it was a statewide election. And so I think that that's happening in some of the other places. Can it be fixed? Yes, but how are we going to fix it? Between now and election day, the first and foremost, each of the people listening, we have to go be involved in campaigns, and we can't think that somebody else is going to do it and take care of it. It's up to us to make sure that the campaigning is happening, going door to door, making the phone calls, sending the text messages. Those are things volunteers can do. And then the party and the campaigns have to be highly engaged, making sure they're showing the contrast between the two candidates and between the 2 political platforms, and showing people how the policies that Republicans will enact are going to make people's lives better than the radical leftist policies we're seeing from the Democrats.
You were part of getting people really engaged in conservative politics with the Tea Party movement. And of course, the national press trashed that movement as if that was different from what the leftists were doing. The leftists seemed to get away with activating their base. But here's my observation. As somebody who ran I didn't intend to run against the establishment, but it just kind of, unfortunately, it just kind of worked out that way. And it took a while for everybody to connect and at least try to get along towards the end. The leftists, they're serious about trying to win. And the good feeling that you and I might feel if we put, $20 or $50 bill in the collection plate at church, like, well, I've done something good here, and I wish I had that $50, but I'm giving it to God, and I'm hoping that the church will do something good. That's how they feel when they donate to a campaign, which is why if you look at their donation patterns, these people are giving money. They're willing to go out. I mean, not everybody's getting paid to go stand in the sub-freezing temperatures with signs talking about how they hate Trump. How do we get our people engaged enough to give money, maybe go out and show up at an event where their voice can be heard, and then fundamentally to vote?
Well, a few things. First, I saw a news report last night. I didn't memorize the numbers, so don't remember all the numbers, but the Republican National Committee has more cash on hand right now than the Democrat, or maybe it was the Republican Senatorial Committee has more cash on hand than the Democrat Senatorial Committee. So Republicans, the point here is Republicans are raising money. We may not hear as much about it, but they are raising money. When it comes to these protests, you're right, not everyone is being paid, but there are people being paid. And
to organize it.
To organize it, to show up, to be on call, to go to a protest and to show up and be on at the protest, or being paid just to be on call. They may not even have to go anywhere, but they're just sort of on standby. And then when they have to go, they show up. And I've researched some of this online. It's nothing that my organization has ever done, but I'm fascinated by it because we haven't ever done it. We rely on volunteers showing up. So there is some of that. And then once it looks like there's a big crowd, it's easier to get volunteers because success begets success.
Right.
So that's part of what's happening there. But the other thing is this: anger motivates people. It is an emotion that really motivates people. And the people on our side of the aisle don't have a lot to be angry about right now. And so it's harder to motivate somebody to go out and stand in the cold or go and volunteer when they're not angry. They actually do want the deportations. They do want the things that President Trump is working to get passed into the law. They want lower taxes. They want the economy to improve. They want only citizens voting. They want voter ID. So it's hard to motivate people when the things that they want are happening. But what we have to remember now is that if we don't get active and we don't get engaged, then especially at the congressional level, we will be dealing with impeachments for the next two years. All of the next Congress will be focused on impeachments. And I don't think that those impeachments will stop with President Trump. They will go on to the vice president, to the secretary of state, throughout the members of his cabinet, RFK Jr. So if you need something to get angry about the thought of losing and having to go through impeachments for the next 2 years. If you didn't like how 2019 and 2020 went for our country, then make sure that you're getting involved and you think about how bad those years wound up being for our country and focus on making sure that doesn't happen in the last 2 years of this term for President Trump.
Well, it's a legitimate concern that it won't just stop with President Trump. I mean, I am really worried when I see the clamor, not just of loudmouths on social media, but I'm seeing more groups that are using the guillotine as their symbol, who are saying that they want to harm anyone who supported ICE. You've got this report today that a guy has been arrested and charged with attempted murder of the director of OMB. We already know that the fellow who tried to kill President Trump, or who was poised to kill President Trump at his own golf course, was sentenced to a life sentence yesterday. They're wackos at any given time in American society, but I think there's something different happening here. There is a growing um, hostility, and it's going to cross over into a violent hostility. And the only way to stop that is to make sure you put responsible, conservative leaders in office who could beat that back before you have to deal with it in the streets.
Well, yeah, I think that you're right. And there is something very different going on right now. And it's more than just what we're seeing on social media. When you have the governor of Minnesota talking about what's happening in his state is like Fort Sumter. He's
Yeah,
trying to say that we're starting a civil war in
right.
his state and that there's a civil war happening. And I think I think initially a couple of weeks ago when I heard that President Trump was kind of changing some things up in Minnesota, I was a little bit frustrated. I'm like, wait, is that giving in to the rioters? And then I took a step back and I thought about what Governor Walz had been saying, and I thought about the fact that President Trump is indeed the president of the entire United States of America, and he has to make sure that he is doing what he needs to do to deport the people. And it's clear he's not backing down on that. He's still going to be deporting, especially the violent criminal element of the people who've entered the country illegally, which is what he's been focused on for the past year. But he also has to make sure that it doesn't escalate so that there is not a civil war in our country. And that's a great responsibility for a president to have. And it's one that I don't think that Biden had to worry about, despite all of the rhetoric from the left about insurrection. And certainly Obama did not have to worry about that. But it's something that I think President Trump there's probably, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but there are probably calculations of that and thoughts about that. And you're right. It seems like things could go very wrong and it could be very dangerous for our country. But what the people in Minnesota who are rioting don't remember about our country, and what everyone needs to remember, we have the chance to upend our government every 2 years peacefully, but through elections. You don't have to be violent. You can go be active in campaigns and change the way the country is going because you're voting in new people. And that's one thing that our founding fathers gave us so that we wouldn't have to have violence on our streets. And I think that I think that Tim Walz is abdicating his duty and his responsibility by not making sure that the people who are rioting are arrested and that the people who are taking over various streets and creating checkpoints and not allowing public traffic on public roads, not arresting those people. He's
Insane.
abdicating his responsibility and duty.
Well, they want this conflict. And my fear is that we're giving in to them. You know, it's kind of like if you've got a kid that does something wrong, you discipline them. They scream, they yell, they try to make it such an ugly scene that you'll give it like, okay, you just shut up. You know, we'll deal with this later, but then you never deal with it. I mean, I learned very quickly with my father as a school principal and a football coach and my mother as a teacher, if you continue to cause a problem and we have to leave, you're not going to like what happens when we get home. And, you know, that happens once or twice and suddenly you adjust your behavior. And I take your point. I think Donald Trump doesn't want a civil war and is doing everything he can to try to prevent that. One of the things that I'm worried about, though, is kind of like 2020. I think that Donald Trump was really restrained when there were riots all over the country in 2020. In Richmond, you know, nobody really covered the riots in Richmond other than when the statues got pulled down. One of the statues, a couple of the statues. And I can imagine, having been around a lot of those DC people who were scared of their own shadow, like, oh my God, you know, we've got to shut this down. Don't overreact. Let them take the property in the CHOP district in Seattle or Portland, or wherever it was. You know, this will work itself out. But if you overstep, then they're going to blame this on you. And I feel like hindsight's 2020, and I'm not even sure that I'm correct on this, but my instinct is we gave the bad guys the green light. Like, these people are so determined not to have a conflict that if we escalate it to the point where there's a conflict, they will back down. And I'm worried that maybe we're repeating that again.
Well, I understand, and that's why I was concerned a couple of weeks ago. But when we listen to what Tom Homan is saying. He has said that I believe it's over 70 counties, and there are 86, I think there are 86 counties in Minnesota. Over 70 have now agreed in the last week and a half that they are going to let ICE come in if they arrest somebody and there is a detainer to deport them. ICE is going to be able to go into those jails and prisons and get them from the jail and prison so they're not released back into the state, and then be able to continue to deport them. Now, there are clearly additional counties, and we need to figure out what's going to happen in the county where Minneapolis is.
Yeah, right.
But that's what is happening in the other states. That's the way other states where we're not having these kind of riots, they're cooperating with ICE, and that's what is happening. And at the end of the day, the goal that what President Trump said he wanted to have happen is that he wants to deport. I think everyone who entered illegally should be deported. He has said he's going to be deporting the ones who are the most violent criminals and the ones who have the history of rape or murder or other violent acts, that he's going to be deporting those people. And Tom Homan is making sure that's happening.
Isn't it crazy that Democrats, they hear that statement, which has been repeated over and over again? We're going after the murderers, the rapists, the armed robbers, the carjackers, and unfortunately there are a lot of them, and they still can't bring themselves to say, yeah, those guys need to go. I mean, I'm not hearing them say that.
No.
They revert back to making excuses for somebody who's in a Central or South American gang, making excuses for the drug dealers, making excuses for someone who's committed domestic assault.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the people on the left are just simply brainwashed. They've listened to so much of the propaganda from the left side of the political aisle. They're not thinking for themselves. They don't know how to think critically. If they've graduated from high school or college anytime in the last decade, they probably never even learned critical thinking skills. They're not looking at many different news outlets to try to get at least a balance. They don't have to believe everything they see from the other side, but they at least need to know what the other side is saying. They don't. And then social media just feeds them more of what they like. So it's just an echo chamber. And it creates a very, very bad problem. Then they're confronted and they say, well, wait, what about this person right here? He raped somebody. This is one of the people President Trump has removed. He's a pedophile. Do you think he should be there? And they don't even know how to answer that. They don't know how to
And if
answer
you
it
have to
because they haven't even,
pause
they
to
think they're
answer that
neighbors.
question, if you
Yeah.
have to pause and think through, this guy molested a child, raped a child, killed someone, and you have to think, well, now, wait a minute, how do I process this through my Trump derangement syndrome
Yeah.
app on my phone? You're crazy if that's where you have fallen as a participant in a civilized society if you can't instantly answer. They got to go. I think.
Yeah, I think that I just think that they have they're just drinking the Kool-Aid at this point, and they're not thinking for themselves. They do have Trump derangement syndrome. Anything that President Trump could say, the sky is blue and the grass is green, and they would argue with it and debate it and say that he's evil and other things because he said that. And
Well,
it's craziness. You know, John, Lake and Riley, she went to my kids' elementary school. She was a year older than them. My kids had the same first grade teacher she had.
is
When
that
she
right?
was murdered, it really shook up my community. And I don't know her family. I didn't know her, so I don't want to overstate my relationship with her. But I watched as friends of the family were just very upset about it. I've met so many people who are angel families whose loved one have been killed from an illegal immigrant. And I think that the people who are so angry about the deportations, they're forgetting the reason for this is because we have so many people who are in the country right now who are not vetted and who are harming and killing, in some cases, American citizens. And they're harming and killing non-citizens as well. It's not just limited to American citizens. And we want to make sure we have a safe civil society. And it boggles my mind that they don't understand that is the goal.
It is alarming that everyone doesn't have that immediate reaction to murder, and that we seem to elevate the worst in society objectively, the people who've committed crime and are hostile and have a rap sheet that's a mile long, that they're exonerated and elevated and have murals put on the buildings downtown, and the innocent people, their lives are erased and they're disposable. I am watching the clock, and I know you got a lot of things to do today, but since it's Ronald Reagan Day, one of the things that constantly comes to mind with me, and I got to watch this, is that Reagan was seen as having a sunny, optimistic, forward-looking mind and attitude, and led with that. And sometimes I get spun up and become kind of down on everything. To end this interview with something that's hopeful, what are you hopeful about in the next year and in the decades to come for America? Do we survive this? Do we avoid a civil war? Is there a way to fix what we're facing?
Yeah, I think that we can survive it. The most important thing to remember is that when we're looking at see what is happening in Minneapolis or in Portland or Seattle or Los Angeles, those are just a few places out of this big, huge country that we have. The vast majority of Americans are not where what we're seeing on television and what we see on our social media feeds. It's not representative of what the whole country thinks. So that gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope is that there is an increase in the number of people who are going to church. There's an increase in the number of people who believe in God today. And I think that we need to make sure we're going back and that we're praying to God, praying for our country, praying for guidance and for God to help us make straight our paths so we know what we need to be doing. And God delivers. And we know that because President Trump is president again against all odds.
That is a miracle that happened. No question about it. Jenny Beth Martin, I appreciate the chance to talk to you. I track you all the time, and I applaud your work with the Tea Party over the last 2 decades. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, John.
Okay. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we continue with more on this Ronald Reagan Day, 2026, what would have been his 115th birthday. We've got former delegate Tim Anderson kind of walking through where the most controversial bills stand at the end of this week of the General Assembly session in Virginia. And if you're not watching from Virginia, don't go away. This is the stuff that's going to impact you. And these crass Democrats, this is now in Virginia, it's now the laboratory of bad ideas that will be coming to a neighborhood near you if they get through here in the Commonwealth. That's why we're fighting it so much. We'll be back with more in just a moment on the Reid Revolution. Back on the Reid Revolution on this Friday morning. I'm John Reid, and as I mentioned, I was at the Capitol and in downtown Richmond yesterday afternoon, and oh boy, it was the the Republican fan club all over the place. I say that with a great deal of sarcasm. Yeah, I could feel the love from a lot of folks, but I did run into the governor at the Omni Hotel. I guess she was giving a speech down there, and I was walking out. She was walking in. And to her credit, you know, I'm a big proponent of just being polite to people, even if you disagree with them. It becomes harder and harder to be candid when there's so many bad things that are happening in the Capitol. But I think she's probably feeling the pressure with her own Democrat legislators, because they have gone crazy left. And I don't know whether she still wants to pretend to be a moderate or not. But it's harder and harder to pull that off when everybody's proposing really left of center things. But at least I'll give the governor credit for being polite and friendly when I saw her as I exited the building to get out of there. Tim Anderson is a former member of the House of Delegates. He is a prominent attorney in Virginia Beach. He joins us every week to talk about some of the legislation that he has been tracking. He's pretty good about updating everybody on social media. Tim, I appreciate you joining us. So while I was downtown and people were giving me the cold shoulder, it sounds like the Democrats had their hatchets out for a lot of weird stuff that they would normally let slide. What's going on?
Yeah, so yesterday something very strange happened on the House floor. A bunch of Republican bills just spontaneously were killed on the floor. Now, when a bill gets to the floor, that means Democrats have approved it through the committee. And, it's pretty much, once it gets to the floor, especially as a Republican, it's going to get through because the Democrats are going to kill all the Republican stuff in committees. Republicans aren't doing anything crazy this year. We're not trying to, get rid of taxes because, they would kill that. But what they're doing is basically minor little tweaks and things to make Virginia's a little better. And I saw things on the floor get killed for like expanding the pharmacy board by one member, a bill that came out of committee unanimously, a bill dealing with how we deal with bonds and just a bunch of stuff, like more than six. And I thought, something happened today that has made the Democrats mad. Somebody's cornflakes got pissed in, and what happened? Because this is punishment. When the House goes 34 to 66 on a bill that had unanimous support in the committee. So I went back and watched everything, and I didn't really see anything happen today in committees, except this one weird little thing. It happened in a HHS committee between Sia Price, who's the subcommittee chair, and Delegate Griffin from Bedford. And he's basically objecting to a bill, and he talks a little bit about how the Democrats didn't stand for the Charlie Kirk memorial that they had the other day. And then he started talking about how he was, trying to get the Democrats to protect unborn babies. And then Sia Price says, "This is not about this bill. You have to stop talking about this." And Griffin says, "Oh, it's, I'm never going to stop fighting for the unborn." And then it goes at ease. The whole video just stops. And I don't know exactly what happened. I wasn't there.
That sounds very Soviet. Was that deliberate, you think?
Yeah. She said the committee will be at ease, and this whole thing was
okay.
45 seconds. 45 seconds. I think crazy stuff happens in these rooms. I think somebody passed out in a committee last evening. I still haven't found that bill, but crazy things happen. When they go at ease, something's happening. And I think in this other case where the lady passed out, they were bringing in the, paramedics to deal with her. But I don't know. But here's the thing. And why I've started with this is, these are called line 5 problems. And line 5 is the 5th line of the bill. It says who the patron is and their party. And the bill has nothing to do with being good or bad. Democrats already thought it was good. They sent it on. But they're punishing the Republicans. And people need to understand that's how the government works. Democrats are in charge. And if you make them mad, they don't just punish you, they punish your whole team. They did this to Barry Knight a couple of years ago. There was a bill that was filed.
He was on appropriations and was the former chair, right?
Yeah, there was a bill about abortion, where the Republicans, a delegate, was trying to, bring an abortion issue forward, and Democrats didn't like it. And so they removed Barry Knight, who was the chair of appropriations under the Republican. They just removed him and replaced him with Delegate Tata, who's in Virginia Beach. And I love Delegate Tata, but she was she shouldn't be on appropriations at that point, pulling off Barry. So that's how it works there, is that if you make them mad, they punish everybody. Everybody suffers. And so we saw multiple delegates' bills get killed today that were just minor little things, just basically showing they're in charge. Republicans have no power. It's just flexing. And, if you step out of line, not only is your stuff going to die, but we're going to kill everybody else's. Like, not only am I going to kill you, but I'm going to kill your family and your neighbors. It's that kind of mentality that we're dealing with in Richmond. And that's
with
crazy.
this
That's how
current
the government
crowd, we
works.
hope they don't graduate to that mindset of actually killing your family. The
Well,
bills are one thing, but don't get Jay Jones in the room.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, I'm not insinuating that, but I do want to just, point that that's how our government runs. Is that if the Democrats don't like, if they get mad at you, everything good is gone, and that's an insane way to run a government.
Will they, I remember when my dad was down there, sometimes a Republican bill, like he would introduce legislation, they would kill his bill, scratch his name through, put a Democrat's name on it, and then pass it through to prevent him from ever claiming credit for it, which didn't work in the old Henrico, where people were sophisticated and conservative. They didn't, they didn't fall for that. I don't know what the deal is today. Did they, like the expansion of the board, would you say optometry board or pharmacy board, did they put a Democrat name on it and go ahead and pass the idea?
No, they just killed it. I mean, Democrats will do
Not
that.
today.
But,
okay.
They'll still bills, like if a Republican dropped a bill and they did that to Mike Cherry with a vacator bill. Bill Heath's been working on the whole summer and all through the fall and has a good bill. And I think it was Cia Price that actually stole it. This is the one that got in the spat with Delegate Griffin today. So, so they'll still bills, but that's petty stuff that happens. But it's just, people don't understand just how ridiculous the General Assembly is. Some bill will die in the Senate because some senator is mad at a delegate that killed their bill 3 years ago. And it's just this tit for tat. I mean, if people really knew that, they would be disgusted at the pettiness that happens in the General Assembly. And we really saw that on full display on Thursday.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a while before the maturity level resets with the social justice warriors down there. But I appreciate you flagging that for us so that, we're aware of that kind of stuff happening. There are plenty of bills, though, that have started to matriculate through the House chamber and the Senate chamber. Anything that we should be watching?
Yeah, so Second Look is a weird bill right now. So Pre-Deeds has the Cognate bill in the Senate, and Cousins in the House has the identical bill. They're called Cognates. And we saw that the Senate bill died in committee on Wednesday. But then the House bill was up for, I suspect it to be killed. And then it didn't die. It went through a little procedural thing and it's still alive. And it looks like it's going to be on the docket today. I haven't seen the full agenda yet, but it's going to be somehow on the docket today. So it would be very weird for a Cognate to get killed and then let some, like the House bill go through. So I don't know what's going on. There's some kind of game being played with Second Look. Now, Second Look is that bill where child pornographers and producers can asked to come out of jail early, and rapists and all these violent felons that got long-term sentences can petition to get their sentences shortened as early as 15 years, in some cases 20, 25, depending upon what it is. But it's to let people out of jail early. And it looked like that was dead. They also killed getting rid of the mandatory minimums. That bill died, so it looked like it was all going to die. But there's this little Frankenstein version of it still in the House. I don't know what's going on, but some game is being played. I keep my eye on that Second Look bill, especially today, and see what comes out of that. It's very strange.
I know you track a lot of the gun bills. You have a gun shop down in Virginia Beach, and you've been a fighter for gun owners and Second Amendment rights. Where do those bills stand?
Well, everybody's watching the assault weapons ban. That is the big one that it has everybody's attention. I mean, there's a lot of stupid gun bills out there, like you have to have 5 acres of land to target practice on your property and all this stuff. There's all this nonsense. But the assault weapons ban really does have some meat and potatoes to it because it affects everybody, not just as owning semi-automatic rifles, but it's owning pistols that have standard issued magazines that might hold more than 10. So what it looks like is it looks like Helmer's bill, Delegate Helmer, is going to be the vehicle that this is going to drive through. And it looks like it is going to clear the General Assembly in this format. Now, I qualify what I'm saying. Today is February, I don't want to say the 5th or 4th. What I'm saying on February 5th may not be what actually happened. So please keep this in mind for anybody watching. But it looks like if you have it, you can keep it. So if you have a semi-automatic rifle, you'll be able to keep it. You just won't be able to sell it, transfer it, or buy a new one. If you have a pistol
Well,
that
it just
has
goes in the casket with you.
Exactly. It looks like you can maybe pass it down as a heirloom, but you wouldn't be able to sell it to your neighbor, for instance. And it looks like also that the magazine capacity ban is going to be 10 rounds. So you will only be able to buy a new handgun that has a magazine of 10 rounds. But if you have one already, you'll be allowed to keep it. So it looks like they're going to create a little bit of a grandfather clause per se into what you have you can keep. You're just not going to be able to buy anything in Virginia after July 1. So that seems to be where this is going. And I think that's probably where we're gonna see land on this.
Well, your store will do a brisk business in the next few months, right? If this passes.
We put a plaque up on the wall with Abigail Spanberger's face on it and called her the gun salesman of the month because
I bet.
She nothing better for a gun shop owner than having a Democrat governor, especially one like this one. But fundamentally, what's really concerning is that there's going to be some substantial changes to what people can purchase and transfer that really don't have any basis to any scientific logic. Here's another bill. They're going to say that if you have children in the house, you have to store your loaded firearms in a biometric safe, a fingerprint safe, where it runs on your fingerprint. Because keyed locks, safes with keys in them are dangerous. And I pointed this out on a Facebook video I made a couple days ago. All biometric safes have keys that open them as a redundancy backup. So really all you're telling people is they have to buy a keyed lock system that also has a biometric component to it, but they're exactly the same. So it is a bunch of people that have no idea what they're doing, trying to virtue signal and act like they know what they're doing. So those are the big ones. And of course, the reciprocity bill is making, it looks like that is going to go through. We'll see. That's being patroned by Delegate Helmer, and it's going to say that our Virginia concealed carry permits will most unlikely work in many states after July of next year. And so what they're going to say is that we're not going to recognize West Virginia's permits. And when we tell West Virginia we're not going to recognize their permits, they're going to say they're not going to recognize ours. And it could cascade our permitting system down to under 10. And so that's one of the reasons I'm traveling.
That's a big problem with a state that we share a border with, I would think.
Oh, well, it's the whole country. I mean, it's like, Virginia has almost 30 states that we have reciprocity agreements with, and we're not going to have those, most likely after the Democrats, pass this bill. So one of the things I do, I'm a firearms instructor, and I've been teaching the Utah concealed carry class, and a lot of people are getting a Utah non-resident permit because they are, trying to insulate themselves from what's coming in Virginia. And so, so everything I'm doing on the gun stuff, I'm just trying to find workarounds from whatever their stupid things are going to be. Like, so they're going to screw us over with our permit reciprocity, get a Utah permit, and that will get you out of, the grips of Virginia's nonsense. And, we're going to find workarounds for everything, legal workarounds with the gun stuff, because they just don't know what they're doing. And there's real good ways to, to work around what they're doing without having to actually break the law.
Well, maybe we can get with you and set up the training so that, I mean, I've got my concealed carry here in Virginia, and I think when I took the class, I think it was a Utah class, but I didn't apply for that. I applied in Virginia.
Yeah, the nice thing about Utah is that there's like 4 Democrats that live there. That's it. And so so there's no changes
Right.
there's no changes to Utah's gun laws. They're very red. And
Let
getting
me
that
ask you about the legislation about how you store your gun in your car. If you're moving, if you're one of these people, and I've got a couple of friends who do repossessions, and they have to go to some places where, you're going to encounter angry people who might try to take revenge on you. They always have a weapon on them. So my first reading of, in the press at least, of some of the legislation out there was that it was going to be almost impossible to move around the state with a weapon because of new legislation that would hold you accountable no matter what you did if anybody stole your weapon out of your vehicle.
Yeah, there's some bills that are going to say that if your firearm is visible from the outside and it's stolen, there could be some consequences to you. There's also a bill that says that you can't store your firearm in your glove box anymore. It would have to be in a secured box bolted to the car, because a secured box bolted to the car is somehow attached to the car more than a glove box is. Doesn't really make sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, they're creating just some archaic and kind of weird and strange laws. But there's not been one gun bill, not one, propounded by any Democrat that would propose to hold somebody who misused a firearm more accountable. Every gun bill is going after legal gun owners that don't create crimes. It's just more regulation, more restrictions. Not one bill says, you know what, we should hold this guy that uses a gun to do something bad more accountable by putting
Right.
them in jail for longer. Not one.
The actual criminal is not their focus.
That's right. It's honestly, every bill is going to make you a criminal. Like, if you don't put your loaded firearm with a kid in the house in a biometric safe, you're a criminal now, even a police officer. And so they're just out of touch, and they're completely off their rockers. And there's really no bills that they're proposing that are going to materially make anybody safe. I mean, so what? We can't buy more AR-15s in Virginia. There's millions of them in the country. And, are you saying that somebody who wants to use an AR-15 in some kind of nefarious way couldn't go down to North Carolina and get one and then bring it into Virginia? I mean, none of this is going to make anybody more safe. It's just going to get more people, lawful gun owners, caught up in crime, and becoming criminals.
Right.
And that's ultimately the goal.
And I think you could argue that it makes law-abiding citizens more unsafe, because the criminals know, I kick in the door. If it's going to take you, I mean, let's say 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes to get to your gun and get it open and get it out, game over at that point. I mean, you're emboldening the bad guys with this type of legislation. I think they don't care. I think the Democrat goal is to make this so complicated and so fraught with peril for the average person that the average person just gives up and says, well, all right, either they stick the gun under the mattress and hope nothing bad ever happens, and they'll just take their chances, or they give up and say, you win, I'm walking away.
I think I don't disagree with that. I mean, you make something hard enough, people just stop trying to do it. It's just unfortunate. But I will say the only good thing about the gun bills is that the United States Supreme Court issued a great opinion a few years ago called the Bruin opinion, and all the Second Amendment people know what's going on with that. And the Bruin opinion really says that unless the law is kind of rooted in American tradition and foundation, it's going to be an infringement on the Second Amendment. So, telling us that we have to have a biometric safe, that's clearly going to violate Bruin. And the problem is it's very expensive to litigate these things, but we're going to really look at VCDL and GOA and NRA and USCCA to carry the torch on this, and like really bring some big fights here, because almost every gun bill that they've proposed should be able to be struck down if they challenge it under Bruin.
Yeah. All right. I don't want to run out of time on this Friday morning without checking on the gerrymandering situation. My understanding is that the appellate court has declined to hear an appeal of the Tazewell judge's ruling, and this is going to the state Supreme Court. Is that correct?
Yeah, by a kind of a remarkable move, the Court of Appeals said, we're not important enough to rule on this. We're not a significant enough court, which is hilarious because everybody knows that about the Court of Appeals. Our Court of Appeals is so what happened is back when Democrats had control last time, they dramatically expanded the Court of Appeals and then they packed it with a bunch of Democrats. And so it's a very liberal court. And it is commonly reversed by our more conservative Supreme Court, which is just a court of, less than 10 guys, 10 people are on the Supreme Court. And I think there's, 25 or 30 judges on the Court of Appeals. And so fundamentally what happened is the Court of Appeals said, we're not sophisticated enough to handle this. We're going to push this up to the Supreme Court and let them make the final decision. There's no place other than the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court's not going to get involved in an interstate gerrymandering fight. So, so now it's at the state Supreme Court level, and there's going to be a question that's going to be answered: is did the judge in Tazewell apply the law correctly? The injunction is only for Tazewell. So the state referendum can still go forward in every other county other than Tazewell, and the state Supreme Court's going to answer the question: was there an intervening election? Yes or no? And if they say there was, well, then there's going to be a referendum on April 21st. But if they say there wasn't, if they said the Tazewell judge got it right, then I think that this referendum is dead because the state Supreme Court has said Tazewell got it right. And, the Democrats are applauding. They're so grateful that it went to the state Supreme Court. I think it's a disaster for them because the state Supreme Court is leaps and bounds more conservative than the Court of Appeals. And with the limited time we had, the Court of Appeals could have run the clock out and made a ruling. And while it would be appealable to the Supreme Court, there would have been no time. So I think that the Democrats
Is
lost.
that why the appeals court decided to step aside? It's weird that a court would abdicate their own authority in any high-profile case, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the Court of Appeals could have said, we're going to keep this, and ran the clock out, made the decision, because all this has to be done by March 5th, no matter what, because March 6th is early voting for an April 21st referendum, right? So you got to have this done by March 5th. The Court of Appeals could have ran the clock out and been the final arbitrator on this subject. But they didn't, and they pumped it up, and now we're going to see the Supreme Court, a court of significantly more conservative judges who were the ones who, participated in drawing the maps just 5 years ago, decide whether they're going to let Democrats redraw the maps, halfway through this election cycle. So I think that I'm pretty optimistic that I'd much rather be in the Supreme Court as a conservative than the Court of Appeals on this issue. So
now, what are you hearing from the politicos today? I have heard from some of the people at the Capitol that Democrats are not really happy with the proposed maps that other Democrats have come up with for these congressional seats, because there's the possibility that one Democrat will have to run against another Democrat, or it makes it at least uncomfortable for people who have been comfortable in Democrat solid seats for a long time, that they're going to have to hustle now. I mean, is there any truth to that? You hearing that from anybody?
Well, there's a lot of Democrats in Northern Virginia, right? Overwhelmingly, there's more. But the only way to make a 10-1 map of Virginia is you have to peel some of those Democrats and dilute them out of a congressional district 11 and kind of dilute them into a congressional district 1. You got to kind of create fingers coming out of Northern Virginia. And it does take away some congressperson who might have a plus 30 Democrat zone, it might turn them into a plus 10. And, that makes those seats a little bit more competitive. But fundamentally, I think the thing I've heard most complaints out of Democrats that I talk to is that they feel like they could probably win CD1 and CD2 without redrawing them. I mean, Abigail won those, won the first district and the second district in this most recent governor's election. She won those districts. And so I think Democrats feel like they don't need to redraw the lines to beat those seats just as they're drawn. And, I don't know. I think that's where I'm hearing more of the frustration is why are we tinkering with something that we're probably already going to win? I mean, at least that's their sentiment right now. But I mean, they just, Don Scott and Louise Lucas just had a press conference on Thursday night and they talked about the lines and, they're definitely moving forward. It is definitely going to be a 10-1 map. We've said it all along. But it's definitely going to be a 10-1 map if that referendum, gets approved by the voters.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go around the state speaking out against what I consider to be a lawless power grab by the Democrats. I'm speaking in Henrico on Monday night to a bunch of business owners about it, and I'm going to travel around the state over the course of the next month, anticipating that the vote will happen on April 21st. And I got to believe, Tim, that some of the business people in Central Virginia, at least, and I hope across the state, who might have been a little passive last year, have been very alarmed at the behavior of the Democrats at the state capitol, especially as it relates to business issues and taxes. And maybe this will be the moment that they will get their butts in gear along with the rank and file voters in Southwest and say, we got to stop this instead of being passive, like I think you could argue a lot of people were in 2025.
Yeah, and one thing people are going to say is, well, Texas started it. Okay, I get that. I understand there's this sentiment that Texas started it. But look what California just did. They have 52 congressional seats in California. And they have 9 Republicans out of 52 in California right now in Congress, in a state that's at least 35% Republican. They have 9 of 52. And they just took away 5 more of those seats with Proposition 50. So when this is all done in California, there's going to be 48 Democrats and 4 Republicans representing the largest state in the country with at least 40% Republicans. So, this didn't start in Texas. This has been something Democrats have been doing for a long time. And, now that Trump says, hey, we should maybe do it too, all of a sudden now that's why Virginia needs to shift it. And it's not something that Texas started. When you look at what California is, nothing can say gerrymandered more than California, even with their current lines. But certainly after Proposition 50 goes in, they're going to have 4 Republicans out of a congressional delegation of 52.
Well, I'm glad you point that historical reference out. I've heard my former colleague at the radio station, Jeff Katz, who used to live in Massachusetts, point out that there's a solid 40% of Republicans in Massachusetts. There's actually been a Republican governor of Massachusetts in my lifetime, but that 40% never gets represented in Congress. And it's because the Democrats are very effective and aggressive about gerrymandering. And so don't act like this was all Trump. I do think you can question whether they thought through what the pushback would be and whether there would be the political ability of Democrats to really hammer Republicans like what we may see here in Virginia. I don't know that I would have taunted that bear given what we're looking at now. But yeah, it's important to know the history here. There are millions of Republicans around the country who have no representation because Democrats have been highly aggressive and partisan in the way they've done this for decades.
That's right. In the states that matter, California, New York, Massachusetts, these big states. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, it's good to see
well,
you.
It's important. Hey, Tim Anderson, you're great. Tim Anderson, the former delegate from Virginia Beach, the attorney there. We'll have to have you back to talk about signing up for the concealed carry Utah permit for people who want to try to get ahead of this. We'll set that up with you, and I always appreciate your time. Thanks. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to come back in a little bit. Listen, you should follow Tim on Facebook if you're at all interested in the synopsis, the brief synopsis of what's happening at the Capitol. Tim is really good throughout the day at popping stuff up. I mean, better than some of the reporters who are down there. Honestly, he gets these things in real time up on Facebook. So I think it's worth giving him a like too. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more on this Friday edition of the Reid Revolution.
I just want to... Oh, I can't resist. I'm supposed to quit right here. But, oh, yes. But in view of the fast things that I just said, I don't know whether you know it or not, but I have a new hobby. I am collecting stories that I can actually prove are told among the Russian people. They make them up themselves, they tell them between themselves, reveals they got a great sense of humor, and they've also got a little cynical attitude about things in their country. And one of these stories, the one I'm going to tell you, I told to General Secretary Gorbachev, and he laughed. The story was an American and a Russian arguing about their two countries, and the American said, look, in my country, I can walk into the Oval Office, I can pound the president's desk and say, Mr. President, I don't like the way you're running our country. And the Russian said, I can do that. The American said, you can? He says, yes. I can go into the Kremlin, to the General Secretary's office, pound his desk and say, Mr. General Secretary, I don't like the way President Reagan's running his country.
See, I mean, I just kind of like the light humor. It's, I mean, even against Gorbachev, he could laugh at it and find it mildly amusing, right? So,
yeah, absolutely.
There, just being kind of classy, and I mean, it wasn't like Reagan didn't have a hint of anger, and he let people know that. I'm not talking to the staff and stuff. I'm talking about, there were numerous times when he was governor, if you go back through the videos, where when the protests were happening in California, and I told the story a lot on the campaign trail. By the way, happy Ronald Reagan Day. That's the whole point of this, if you missed the start of the show, that today would have been President Reagan's 115th birthday. But, I told the story often on the campaign trail about how I was in the living room with the president waiting for Mrs. Reagan one day, and I made a comment about some really bad news, race riots in L.A. This is 1993. And long story short, he said, don't worry about that. That's always going to be a part of a society. There are people who want to tear things down. There are people who hate people. There are people who will behave badly. The trick in life is to find people who want to build, who want to make things better, who are working very diligently in a responsible, civilized way to advance themselves and the civilization. That's who you got to find. And I just keep thinking of it as I watch these radicals in the street who have been convinced that this is the way to achieve in this society, in the structure that we have in this society, that's the way to win people over. And I just can't let them be successful at that. I mean, you have a society where you can speak at the Virginia General Assembly, you can speak and communicate directly with your congressperson. You can go have peaceful demonstrations. I mean, really peaceful demonstrations where nothing gets trashed, no one gets hit in the face, no one gets pepper sprayed, no one screams the F word at other people. You actually make your case in an intellectual way. You have that opportunity in this society, and at least, knock on wood, up until recently, you didn't have anyone following you home to kidnap you or abuse you or a family member, right? I don't think Americans really have an appreciation that that is not the situation that people find themselves in a lot of the Central and South American countries, or in the Middle East, or in Asia. We have built through Western civilization hundreds of years of turmoil, a society where there is this civilization, and we're throwing it away, and we're letting the vulgarians amongst us do the destruction. And I'm kind of shocked. I mean, it's one thing if somebody's a really uneducated, low impulse control idiot. But there are a lot of people in the suburbs who have been conditioned to think that this is the way you're supposed to behave. Like marching in the street is the equivalent of a strong op-ed or a speech, or communicating in a way that changes people's minds. I don't get it. How have we gotten to this place? And we got to stop it from becoming the default position in the country.
Well, and funny you should say that. That was sort of the topic of Ronald Reagan's traditional farewell warning in his last address as president to the nation in January of 1989, warning people of the rise of sentiment that was anti-American and prone to this notion that somehow America was the least of the countries on earth instead of the greatest of the countries on earth.
Well, why don't we play that clip? It's even smart to go back and look at these things in a contemporary context. And I think you find when you watch Reagan and when you read Reagan's speeches, many of which he wrote in his own hand. If you go to the Reagan Library out in Simi Valley, you can see this. They always said he was dumb. Oh my God, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, this guy had his own vision, and he expressed it himself on a regular basis. And I remember watching this speech live when I was 17, 18 years old.
Yeah.
And it was moving then. I'll be curious to see what we think of it watching it right now.
Yeah, and it's several minutes long, so bear with us here, folks. But let me see if I can share my screen here. Here we go. Let's see.
Finally, there is a great tradition of warnings in presidential farewells. And I've got one that's been on my mind for some time. But oddly enough, it starts with one of the things I'm proudest of in the past 8 years. The resurgence of national pride that I called the new patriotism. This national feeling is good, but it won't count for much, and it won't last unless it's grounded in thoughtfulness and knowledge. An informed patriotism is what we want. And are we doing a good enough job teaching our children what America is and what she represents in the long history of the world? Those of us who are over 35 or so years of age grew up in a different America. We were taught very directly what it means to be an American. And we absorbed almost in the air a love of country and an appreciation of its institutions. If you didn't get these things from your family, you got them from the neighborhood, from the father down the street who fought in Korea, or the family who lost someone at Anzio. Or you could get a sense of patriotism from school. And if all else failed, you could get a sense of patriotism from the popular culture. The movies celebrated democratic values and implicitly reinforced the idea that America was special. TV was like that too, through the mid-60s. But now we're about to enter the 90s, and some things have changed. Younger parents aren't sure that an unambivalent appreciation of America is the right thing to teach modern children. And as for those who create the popular culture, well-grounded patriotism is no longer the style. Our spirit is back, but we haven't re-institutionalized it. We've got to do a better job of getting across that America is freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of enterprise, and freedom is special and rare. It's fragile. It needs production. So we've got to teach history based not on what's in fashion, but what's important. Why the Pilgrims came here, who Jimmy Doolittle was, and what those 30 seconds over Tokyo meant. You know, 4 years ago, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, I read a letter from a young woman writing to her late father, who had fought on Omaha Beach. Her name was Lisa Zanata Hen, and she said, "We will always remember. We will never forget what the boys of Normandy did." Well, let's help her keep her word. If we forget what we did, we won't know who we are. I'm warning of an eradication of the American memory that could result ultimately in an erosion of the American spirit. Let's start with some basics. More attention to American history and a greater emphasis on civic ritual. And let me offer lesson number one about America. All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tomorrow night in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do. And that's about all I have to say tonight, except for one thing. The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we'd call a little wooden boat. And like the other pilgrims, he was looking for a home that would be free. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. And how stands the city on this winter night? More prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady no matter what storm. And she's still a beacon, still a magnet for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. We've done our part, and as I walk off into the city streets, a final word to the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, the men and women across America who for 8 years did the work that brought America back. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time. We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye. God bless you. And God bless the United States of America.
Well, I sure miss that. That cadence, that thoughtfulness, that calmness. I mean, it's a different society in 2026 than it was in 1989, headed into the 90s. But I mean, you got to think, how have we changed, and how have we arrived at this place with this attitude? And I'm not saying go backwards, but how do we get to a solid place in the modern era where there is economic prosperity that's widespread for the vast majority of us? Now, everybody's, I mean, I may not ever be a millionaire. I thought I was, but it may not work out that way. But can we have widespread prosperity and relative peace? And when there is a conflict or an argument domestically, it doesn't turn into what we're seeing on a regular basis. How do we get to that? The leaders that we got right now are not accomplishing that for us. And I think largely that comes from the left. They won't accept anybody. And they're, I think, being led by people who, we thought the communists were all overseas, and I'm not trying to be bombastic here. I think they're probably more overt communists who, if you have a drink with them, will tell you they're communist. There are probably more communists in Washington, D.C. and New York City today than there are in Eastern Europe collectively. People who embrace that mindset and would tell you that. I think that's disturbing. I don't think I'm just being a jerk about that. I think that's the truth. But.
Well, scary that multitudes of these people are anywhere in the Western world. You'd think that the lessons of history would be enough to show them that they're misguided.
After 100 years of however many millions of people being starved to death, executed,
hundreds,
and impoverished, you would think that there would be objectively a rejection of this philosophy economically and culturally, and the reflexive hostility towards the Nazis and World War II Germany. I've never understood why. I mean, I get why you don't like Nazis. I understand that, but why do the communists get a pass? Why would no one would wear a Nazi T-shirt out to a festival in downtown Richmond or in D.C.
Right.
But people wear the Che Guevara and the sickle and hammer and act like it's some sort of throwback nostalgic T-shirt, like an old Rush concert. Give me a break. What's that all about?
Or act as though that it's really any different philosophically or ideologically than the swastika. They're birds of a feather that flock together quite candidly. But I mean, it starts at ground zero. No, I don't mean that ground zero. I mean education. The reason we are in this position is because for generations at the ground level in our educational, or if we can even call them educational institutions, let's call them schooling centers, I guess, we have taught a philosophy that is very different from the philosophy on which America was founded and based. And until or unless that changes, I don't think we're going to see the end to the hammer and sickle and Che Guevara shirts as a pop culture fad around town or whatever else. It's gonna take an intellectual revolution, and an intellectual revolution must always precede a political revolution. Ideas are what lead to action. So we need to change the culture from an intellectual and ideological standpoint if we're going to see the revitalization of America as to be what our founders envisioned and what Reagan talked about in that farewell address.
So many people I know hate America, especially Democrats. I mean, I said, and I was surprised this wasn't more controversial this week, most people that I know who have chosen to be Republican, even minorities, gay people I know, black people I know, Asian people, they are Republicans because they love America and they want to live a happy life in America, and they think the fundamentals of the country are solid and good, and they're proud to be Americans. I mean, who am I to question everybody's motivation for being a Democrat? But what I hear from the Democrat Party is this constant refrain, and it's been this way for about 25 years, maybe a little bit more, that America is the problem. America is the problem internationally. America is flawed. It's, the original sin garbage that we talk about with slavery, as if somehow slavery arrived, white people in America came up with slavery. Nothing could be further from the truth. But we have internalized that, and we've allowed these leaders and educators, indoctrinators, to convince now a couple of generations of young Americans that we are the problem. And I think we're reaching the place where the conclusion that these people have reached is we're the problem, and we must be dismantled as a society in order to arrive at some utopia that they don't even have the ability to write about. I mean, I look across America, I don't see a Thomas Jefferson writing anything of note or worth. I see a lot of people who are very derogatory about America. I don't see anybody offering any type of America 2.0. I don't. I hear a lot of moaning and groaning and complaining, and I think that is motivated by these commies who they warned us 50 years ago, 60 years ago, your children are going to live under communism. And I was one of the people who in 1989 I was finishing high school. I went off to college. I thought we won. I mean, I really was like, oh my God, this is amazing. We're going to live in the greatest time in the history of humanity because we've defeated this horrible gangrene that destroys the hearts, minds, souls, the body politic, societies. We've won. And I am embarrassed to say that in my time, my generation, we took our eye off the ball and we let these people come in and let this build in our own backyard. And now I think we're faced with a real potential of a collapse here and domestic violence like we've never seen before.
Nobody's writing, John. I've written my Curious About Freedom manuscript here.
Okay, TJ.
Shameless self-promotion. But you're right. We need more people actually promoting the values and virtues of our society. Maybe through podcast land like this. We're doing our part. I hope. Maybe.
That's why we're doing it, because I can't count. I mean, clearly at the age of 55, I'm thankful that the internet exists and that we're able to do something like this, because I can't count on the leftists who run these networks to give me a platform. I mean, they would,
right.
Even when I was a candidate, I delusionally thought, oh, being a candidate, I will be empowered to speak. Oh, hell no. It was even worse. It was like, no, you're not going to speak. And that was kind of shocking. So all the things that you would normally do to try to appropriately and with dignity engage with the public, the machinery that exists in the society seems to be very rejecting of that. And so I'm not going to sit around. I mean, I only got maybe 25 years left before I'm dead, if I'm lucky. And I'm not going to sit around and wait for some dumbass CEO to finally say, oh, well, let's pick this guy. I mean, I can't do that. I'm not willing to do that. And I think in previous generations, you wrote letters to the editor, or you ran for city council and you wrote, and people consumed this material. Now, this is the way people get to know potential leaders and thought leaders. It is concerning to me that the conservative movement, I don't want to beat up on my own people, but I look at who is moving the needle in the conservative movement, and often I'm like, oh my God, who are these folks? What have they done? I mean, there are a lot of people who have huge audiences on a regular basis, and if you actually look at them and what they've accomplished in life, they are very articulate and they are very loud and they're very fervent in their beliefs, but it's based on what? It's almost like it's a collection of parrots that just repeat what they think everybody wants to hear, and I don't see us moving anything. I'm not to be hypercritical of my own people, but I do worry about that. You gotta look. Fox News used to always put on the screen when it first started. They would put the bio of the person that you were seeing. So you'd know where they were educated. You would know what their job experience had been. You would know who they were, where they're from. So while they talked, you could kind of gauge, is this opinion a valid opinion? Because everybody's got an opinion, but is there an informed opinion? Is there anything that they've got standing to offer the commentary? And I'm not trying to discredit people or push people off the stage, but I do think you got to be somewhat discerning about who you're listening to and who you're taking advice from. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, shall we wrap it up? 11:45. Yep.
Yeah, really quickly though, one of our followers wanted to know what the latest was about Arlington House. Should we talk about that really quickly, or
Well, I was going to save that for next week.
let's save that? Okay, we'll save that for Monday.
I think
Okay.
ending on a high note with President
Yes.
Reagan is probably a good
That's right.
thing. So,
Oh, and by the way,
yep.
very important, maybe most important of all, you know whom Ronald Reagan once collaborated with, right?
Tell me.
They worked together in the early '60s on the General Electric Theater. So yeah, Ron and Jer, Ronnie and Jerry. So he probably called him Ronnie. That's crazy.
Maybe.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
back
So
before he was even
for those
governor.
of you who don't know, the people at the radio station will remember. Producer Dan is the one person in America who is obsessed with Jerry Goldsmith, and we are blessed to have that the aficionado with us. And that's great. I wouldn't put the two of them in the same sentence, but okay, if they work together, then that's notable.
Right. That's right.
That's right.
That's
Okay.
right. That's
Oh my God, Jerry Goldsmith Day is Tuesday.
everybody important is born in February, John. But yeah, so that's right. That's right. From February 6th to February 10th. I tell you what. But
all right.
yes.
Well, we'll end with Ronald Reagan. How about that?
We'll end with Ronald Reagan.
And we'll be back on Monday for more of the Reid Revolution. I hope
That's
you'll
right.
follow us and give us a like on Facebook. We now have 2 pages, and it would really help me if we could get above 10,000 on the new page. So if you're watching this, I would really, really, really appreciate if you go to the Reid Revolution. The second page is the Reid Revolution with John Reid. You're probably following there. The Reid Revolution is the backup page, so we're not deplatformed. And give us a like and a follow there on X and all across social media. Apple and Spotify if you want to listen to the podcast. We'll be back on Monday morning. I hope you have a great weekend. Happy Ronald Reagan Day, everybody.